She whispered, "Please don't hurt me," but the cowboy said, "I'll protect you." There was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken feeling that something wasn't right, though the town appeared empty, like it was waiting for something, waiting for her maybe. She walked slowly, carefully, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. Every step she took seemed too loud, as if the night itself were listening. Her heart raced faster than she could control, and she wrapped her arms around herself as though that would protect her from the cold and the fear twisting inside her. Her name was Clara, but tonight, it didn't matter. Names didn't mean much when you had no place to go, no one to turn to. It was just a word she used to remind herself she was real. But sometimes, in a world like hers, it was hard to believe that. Clara had learned long ago that silence was safer than speaking, that being invisible was her best defense. Her voice, when she used it, had often been a plea, a cry for help, but no one had ever answered, not in a way that mattered. People had their own problems, their own lives. She was just a face in a crowd to them, a stranger they'd walk past without a second glance. That's how it had been for years. Always running, always moving, never staying long enough to form connections or hope for a better future. The kind of life where dreams didn't exist, only survival did. She had come to terms with it. There was no use wishing for things she would never have. The world wasn't built for people like her, people who had learned too many hard lessons too early. Tonight, she was running again. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that the last place had become too dangerous. She had stayed too long in a place where people knew too much about her, things that made her feel small, insignificant, and desperate. The place had become a prison. There had been too many threats, too many eyes watching her. The fear had started to suffocate her, even in the silence. So she had left under the cover of darkness, hoping to outrun everything, even if it meant stepping into the unknown. But as Clara walked through the dusty streets of this strange town, she realized she was as lost as she had ever been. The buildings here were old, their windows covered with grime, their doors hanging on rusty hinges. The streets had a kind of emptiness, as though life had moved on long ago and only the memories remained. There were no lights on, no voices from behind closed doors, just the sound of her own footsteps echoing in the silence. The sound of her footsteps was the only thing keeping her grounded. Without it, she might have forgotten where she was, or worse, why she was here. The quiet was almost too much to bear, and she found herself wishing for something, anything, to break the stillness. It wasn't the fear of being alone that troubled her most, though. No, it was the other kind of fear, the kind that made her stomach twist. The kind that made her glance over her shoulder even though she knew no one was there. The kind of fear that had followed her for years, creeping up on her when she least expected it. And tonight, that fear was real. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she heard a noise in the distance. It was a soft sound, but it was enough to make her stop. Her heart beat faster, and she instinctively pressed her back against a brick wall, trying to disappear into the shadows. She could feel her pulse in her ears, each beat louder than the last. The noise grew closer. A door creaked open somewhere behind her, and she held her breath. Her body tensed. The fear was back, wrapping around her like a cold, familiar blanket. She had learned to trust her instincts by now, and her instincts were telling her to run. Clara moved quickly, her feet barely making a sound on the dirt. She stayed in the shadows, hugging the wall as she moved down the street. She could feel the darkness pressing in on her, a thick fog that seemed to swallow everything whole. Another noise. This time it was closer. Her heart skipped a beat. Someone was following her. She didn't know who they were, but it didn't matter. She had learned that danger didn't always come in the form of someone she recognized. It came from the shadows, from the people who didn't care about who she was, only what they could take from her. She quickened her pace, her breathing shallow, her mind racing. She could hear footsteps behind her now, slow and deliberate. They were getting closer. Panic surged through her, but she fought to keep it in check. She couldn't afford to panic, not now, not when she had no way out. Clara turned a corner sharply, trying to lose whoever was following her, but she was trapped. The alley she had entered was narrow, a dead end with no way out except the way she had come. She looked up at the sky, as though the stars might offer her a way out, a solution to this nightmare. But the stars offered no answers. She turned quickly to face the street, hoping to see anyone who could help her. But the street was as empty as ever, the silence stretching out before her like a void. She was alone. The footsteps stopped. For a moment there was nothing but silence. The world seemed to freeze around her as if holding its breath. Then from the shadows a figure stepped forward. It was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a weathered hat that shadowed his face. His steps were slow, measured, as though he knew exactly what he was doing. Clara froze, every muscle in her body tense. Her eyes widened as she realized just how vulnerable she was. She was trapped, cornered, with nowhere to go. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She had learned to keep her voice soft, to make herself as small as possible. "Please don't hurt me." His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time in a long time Clara felt something different. Not fear, but a strange sort of peace, as if the moment had shifted somehow. "I'll protect you," he added, taking a step forward. It wasn't a promise of safety, it was more than that. It was the kind of assurance that only someone who had seen the worst of the world could offer. The words didn't sound like a guarantee, but they were something more, a quiet, unspoken understanding. Clara didn't know who this man was, or where he had come from, but in that moment his presence gave her something she had never felt before: hope. She wasn't alone anymore. The cowboy stood in the dim light, his figure shadowed by the hat pulled low over his face. Clara could barely make out the features of his face, but there was something about him, a steadiness, an unspoken promise that made her hesitate. The streets were still empty except for the two of them, but Clara could feel the tension hanging in the air. The quiet of the night seemed to press in around them. Even the wind had calmed, as if waiting for something to happen. She had seen a lot of men in her life, some good, many bad, and every one of them had something different about them. The good ones were the ones who smiled too much, the ones who made empty promises that sounded pretty at the time. The bad ones, well, they didn't bother with promises at all. They took what they wanted and left. But this man, this cowboy, was different. He wasn't smiling, wasn't offering her anything except the weight of his words. "I'll protect you." But something in the way he stood, calm and still, made her feel as if he meant what he said. It was the kind of confidence that came from experience, someone who knew what the world was like but had somehow managed to survive it without losing himself. Maybe he had been broken too. Maybe that was why he understood what it meant to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. The man took another step toward her, his boots clicking against the pavement. It was a slow, deliberate movement, and for the first time in a long time Clara felt herself breathe easier. Not because she was safe, but because there was a chance, a slim chance that maybe, just maybe, she could stop running. For so long, running had been all she knew. It was how she had survived. Run from one town to the next, from one nightmare to the next. Each time she built a new life, pretending to be someone else, hoping that the next place would be better, that the next person would be kind. But they never were. The world was always the same, no matter where she went. But this man, he was different. She could feel it in her bones. He wasn't trying to rescue her. He wasn't asking for anything in return. He was simply there, and in that simple presence something shifted in her. The walls she had built around herself, the ones that had kept her safe for so long, started to crack. The loneliness, the pain, the constant fear, it all began to loosen its grip on her heart just a little. "I don't want any trouble," Clara said, her voice shaking just slightly. She hadn't meant to say it, but the words came out before she could stop them. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't even a warning, it was just the truth. She didn't want trouble. She had seen too much of it already. She didn't know how much more she could take. The cowboy nodded, his expression unreadable. "I don't want trouble either," he said, his voice low but clear. "But trouble has a way of finding people, and when it does, it's good to have someone who can stand in the way." But standing here looking at this man, she began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be alone anymore. Maybe it was okay to let someone else in. Maybe she didn't have to keep running. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. It wasn't a demand. It was more of a curiosity, an attempt to understand the man standing before her. Who was he to offer such a simple promise without asking for anything in return? The cowboy hesitated, looking down at his boots for a moment as though weighing the question. When he finally spoke, his words were measured, slow. "Name S. Will," he said. "Been around a while, seen a lot, not much to tell, really." He didn't seem like the kind of man who would offer his life story to a stranger, and that was fine with her. She didn't need to know his past. She didn't need to know why he was here or why he was offering his protection. All she needed to know was that he was here now, and for whatever reason, he had chosen to stand with her. "You're not from here, are you?" she asked, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tried to figure out where he came from. Will chuckled softly, a sound that was low and almost tired. "Not unless this place has changed a lot since I last passed through," he said. His eyes met hers for a moment, and there was something there, something that told her he wasn't just a passerby, that he wasn't just some drifter like the others who came and went. "No, I'm not from here, but I've been around enough to know that people sometimes need help, even if they don't ask for it, even if they don't know they need it." She didn't know what to say to that. She didn't know how to explain that she hadn't asked for help in years, that she hadn't trusted anyone in what felt like forever. That asking for help had only ever led to disappointment and pain. But this was different. Will wasn't asking her to open up. He wasn't demanding anything. He was simply offering his presence, his silence, and the promise of safety. Maybe she didn't have to run anymore. Clara looked down at her feet, uncertain of what to do next. She didn't know what this man wanted, and that scared her more than anything. But for once, she didn't feel completely alone. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said quietly, more to herself than to him. The words felt heavy, like an admission of weakness, but it was the truth. She didn't know how to trust anymore. She didn't know how to trust anyone, not after everything that had happened. Will didn't answer her right away. Instead, he took a step back, his eyes scanning the alleyway behind her as though making sure no one else was around. Then he looked at her again, and his expression softened just slightly. "You don't have to trust me yet," he said. "But if you give me a chance, I'll prove that I'm here to help. That's all I can promise. The rest is up to you." The next few moments passed in silence, but the kind of silence that was different from the fear-driven quiet that had hung between Clara and the world for so long. This silence was calm, almost like the quiet before a storm, but without the weight of impending danger. It was a stillness that made her feel, just for a moment, as though the world had stopped spinning around her. Will stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, constantly scanning the street. He wasn't looking at her the way most people did, like they were trying to figure her out or weigh her down with expectations. He just seemed present, and that was new for Clara. She had spent years being invisible, and for good reason. Her past had taught her that staying hidden, staying quiet, was the only way to stay safe. She had learned not to ask for help, never to show weakness, never to let anyone get too close. She had been burned too many times to trust the world and the people in it ever again. But Will's presence didn't feel like a threat. Not exactly. There was something in the way he stood, so steady, like he had already seen the worst of the world and had learned to deal with it without losing himself. His calmness was not the kind that came from being naive. It was the kind that came from experience, from walking roads that were harder than anything Clara could imagine. She wasn't sure why she was still standing here, talking to him. She should have kept moving. There was a chance that the danger was still lurking nearby, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down. But something in her made her stay. Maybe it was the promise he had made earlier, "I'll protect you." Or maybe it was just the simple fact that for the first time in a long while she didn't feel entirely alone. "Are you hungry?" Will asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low but warm, and it somehow made the night feel a little less cold. Clara wasn't sure what to make of the question. Hungry? Was that something people still cared about? She hadn't really thought about food in days, not with everything that had been going on in her life. But now that Will had mentioned it, she realized that she hadn't eaten a real meal in far too long. A couple of cold scraps here and there, maybe, some stale bread, a bite of whatever she could find whenever she could find it. She didn't answer him right away. The offer felt strange, like he was asking something more than just if she wanted to eat. But then again, maybe he was just being kind. It was so easy to forget what kindness felt like when the world had only shown her cruelty. "Yeah," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm hungry." A few blocks, maybe, until they reached a small diner tucked between two old buildings, almost as if it had been there for years, forgotten by time. It wasn't fancy, but it had warmth to it, real warmth, like the kind you found in a place where people were known by their first names, where everyone in the town stopped by at least once a week. The neon sign outside flickered, casting a soft light on the sidewalk. The door creaked open and a bell jingled above it as they stepped inside. Clara flinched slightly at the sudden change in atmosphere, the soft hum of chatter and clinking silverware filling her ears. The air was thick with the smell of fresh coffee and something sweet baking in the back. It was a place that felt normal. And for Clara, normal was a foreign concept. She stood there for a moment, frozen by the simplicity of it all. For the first time in a long time, the weight she carried on her shoulders felt a little lighter. She wasn't used to this kind of quiet, this kind of safety. But it wasn't too much. It was just enough. Will led her to a booth in the corner, the faded leather seats creaking slightly under their weight. He sat across from her, watching her as she looked around. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, approached them almost immediately. "Well, hello there, stranger," the waitress said, her voice friendly but not pushy. She looked between Will and Clara, her eyes settling on Clara for just a second longer than was probably necessary. "What can I get you both tonight?" She wasn't sure what she wanted, but the warmth of the coffee and the soft light in the diner made her suddenly realize how long it had been since she'd eaten something that wasn't just a quick snack. "A sandwich," she said, her voice almost shy. "Turkey, if you have it." The moment she left, Clara realized she was still staring at the table. Her hands were clenched in her lap, and she was trying to stop herself from looking too uncomfortable. She hadn't been in a situation like this in so long, sitting down to eat, like she was a normal person, without looking over her shoulder every 5 minutes. Will didn't seem to notice her unease. He just sat back, his hands resting on the edge of the table, his eyes calm as ever. It was like he wasn't worried about anything. He wasn't waiting for danger to show up. He was just there. And it made Clara feel like maybe, just maybe, she could start to believe that things could be different. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Clara said suddenly, her voice quiet but steady. She looked up at Will, meeting his eyes for the first time since they had come inside. "You said you'd protect me. I don't know if I can trust that. I've been hurt before. I've trusted people before and they've left me behind. I don't want to go through that again." Then when he spoke, his voice was calm, but there was a depth to it that made her listen harder. "I understand," he said. "You've been through a lot, and I can't promise you that everything will be easy. I can't promise you that things will be perfect or that the world will suddenly stop being cruel. But what I can promise is this: I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to trust me right away, but I'm not going to let anything happen to you, not while I'm around." Before she could respond, the waitress returned with their food, 2 steaming cups of coffee, a sandwich, and some fries that Clara hadn't expected but was grateful for. The smell of the food filled the air, and for a moment Clara forgot everything. The fear, the running, the years of loneliness, it all faded into the background as she picked up her sandwich and took a bite. And in that moment, she realized something important. Maybe she wasn't completely alone anymore. Maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth holding on to. In this expanded section, the bond between Clara and Will deepens through a simple act of kindness, where Will's promise begins to take root. The normalcy of a shared meal and the warmth of the diner contrast sharply with Clara's usual life, highlighting how much she's been missing. This part sets up their growing trust and sets the stage for the next steps in their journey together. The next few days passed slowly, like the gentle rhythm of a river flowing in the background of Clara's life. Each day felt like a little step forward, a little bit of distance between her and the shadows that had haunted her for so long. She woke up to the sound of birds singing outside Will's small cabin, a place that felt almost too quiet, too safe, but in a way, it was exactly what she needed. Will had led her to a place far from the city, far from the noise and the dangers of the life she had been running from. His cabin sat on the edge of a small, sleepy town, the kind of place where people knew each other by name, and the worries of the world seemed a distant echo. It was different from everything Clara had ever known. There were no sirens, no strangers watching her from the shadows, no reason to always be on alert. The silence here wasn't a threat, it was peaceful. Still, the change unsettled her. She wasn't used to this kind of peace. She had spent so long in motion, constantly on the run, always keeping one eye on the past, afraid of what might catch up with her if she stopped moving. And now here she was stopping. For the first time in a long time, she had to face the stillness, and the stillness made her realize just how tired she really was. Each morning, she would wake up early, the sunlight just beginning to spill through the cracks in the window. Will would already be up, working outside. He was quiet in a way that made him seem like part of the land he worked on, like he had been here for years. He had his own way of getting things done, calm, steady, without rushing. It was the kind of rhythm Clara had never been able to follow. She had always been in a hurry, always trying to outrun something. But now, with Will around, she had learned to slow down. She helped with small things, fetching water, tending to the garden, making the meals. It wasn't much, but it gave her a sense of purpose. More than that, it made her feel like she belonged somewhere, if only for a little while. Clara wasn't used to belonging. She had lived most of her life as a wanderer, moving from place to place, always keeping to the edges of things. But now, with each passing day, she found herself growing more comfortable in the routine. And in that comfort, something else started to happen. She started to relax just a little. The constant tightness in her chest, the fear of being caught, the anxiety that had lived in her for so long, it began to ease. It wasn't gone completely, but it was a start. One evening after dinner, as the last bits of sunlight dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear, Clara sat on the porch, watching the sky change. Will was nearby, fixing something on the fence, his hands working skillfully despite the fading light. There was something calming about the way he moved, as though he wasn't in a rush, as though there was no deadline for the work. For someone who had spent so much of her life being rushed, Clara found it strangely comforting. "Do you ever get tired?" Clara asked suddenly, her voice soft as she looked at the stars. She didn't mean it in a physical sense, though she was sure Will got tired like anyone else. No, she meant it deeper than that, tired of life, tired of carrying the weight of the past. Will paused for a moment, the wrench in his hand stilling in the air. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, he seemed to take his time, like he was choosing his words carefully. Clara waited, unsure if she even wanted an answer. Sometimes it was easier not to ask questions, easier to let the silence stay between them, but Will didn't seem to mind the silence. Finally, he put the wrench down and turned to face her. His face was partially illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light, and for the first time in days, Clara saw something in his eyes, a depth that made her feel like he was sharing a small part of himself with her. "Tired of life," he repeated quietly, his voice almost a whisper against the still night. "I think we all get tired, Clara. The trick is knowing when to stop and when to keep going. I've learned that sometimes the best thing to do is nothing at all. Just let things be for a while." There had always been a pressure, a need to keep moving, keep surviving, keep outrunning whatever dark thing was chasing her. But now, in the quiet of this small place, she was starting to understand what he meant. She leaned back in her chair, looking up at the stars, letting the cool evening air settle around her. The sky was vast, endless, and for a moment it felt like all the weight of the world had been lifted off her shoulders. She didn't have to fight anymore. She didn't have to run. "I don't know how to stop," Clara admitted, her voice barely audible in the stillness. "I've been running for so long, I don't even remember what it feels like to just be still." Could she trust that the world wouldn't collapse around her if she finally allowed herself a moment of peace? It was a scary thought, but maybe it was the kind of scary that could help her heal. Over the next few days, Clara found herself taking smaller steps, trying to live in the moment. It wasn't easy, but with Will's quiet support, she started to let go of the constant tension that had been a part of her for as long as she could remember. They spent more time together, working side by side, talking little but understanding each other more than words could say. Clara began to realize that Will wasn't just protecting her from physical danger. He was protecting her from the storms inside her own mind, the ones that made her feel like she could never rest. One afternoon, as they worked in the garden, Will looked over at Clara, his expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing to say. "You don't realize it, but you have. You're learning to let go of the things that hurt you. That's not easy. Most people can't do it." "I don't know if I'll ever be able to completely let go," Clara said quietly, pulling a weed from the garden and tossing it aside. "There are things I'll always carry with me, but maybe I can start to live with them instead of running from them." He didn't expect her to forget the past, but he was showing her that it didn't have to define her. She wasn't just her past. She was here now in this moment, and that was enough. In this expanded section, Clara's journey of healing continues as she begins to trust Will and learn the value of slowing down and letting go of the constant pressure to survive. Their quiet connection grows as they both navigate the idea of peace and letting go of the past. Will's support becomes a steady force in Clara's life, allowing her to take the first steps toward emotional healing. Would you like to move on to the next part, or would you like me to adjust anything here? The days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of Clara's life began to feel more like a song than a struggle. It was as though she had forgotten what it felt like to be at peace, and now that she was beginning to experience it again, it felt strange, but welcome. Every day brought with it small lessons: how to water the plants properly, how to fix a fence without rushing, how to listen to the world around her instead of drowning it out. Will, as always, was a quiet presence in her life. He didn't push her to talk more than she wanted to. He didn't ask questions about her past, and in a way that made Clara feel like she could breathe easier. She didn't have to explain herself, and that was something she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was enough just to be here with him, in the quiet of this small cabin and the open space that stretched out beyond it. One afternoon, as Clara worked in the garden, pulling weeds from between the rows of vegetables, she realized something. She was no longer afraid of what might come next. The fear that had clung to her like a second skin for so long had started to fade. Oh, it wasn't gone completely, but it wasn't the first thing she thought of when she woke up in the morning. It wasn't the thing that kept her up at night. That fear had been replaced by something new, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: hope. Clara wasn't entirely sure what to do with hope. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time, and it made her uneasy. For so long, she had kept her heart locked away, afraid of what would happen if she allowed herself to believe in something better. The world had taught her not to trust those kinds of feelings. But now, with Will's quiet support and the life they were building together, hope seemed to sneak up on her, slowly but surely. One evening, after another peaceful dinner, Clara found herself sitting on the porch again, the cool breeze ruffling her hair. The stars were starting to appear, one by one, dotting the sky with their faint light. Will was sitting beside her, his long legs stretched out in front of him, his arms resting on the edge of the porch. The quiet between them had become comfortable, a silence that didn't need to be filled with words. I used to think I would never stop running, Clara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't even know why she said it, but the words felt important, like they needed to be said. I thought that if I stopped, if I stayed in one place too long, something terrible would happen. I didn't know how to stay still. I didn't know how to live without looking over my shoulder. It just keeps you moving. Sometimes, staying still is the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's the only way you can heal. But now, after everything she had been through, after the time she had spent here with Will, she was beginning to see that staying still might be the only way to truly heal. It wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about learning how to live with it, how to carry it without letting it define her. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to feel something beyond survival. She allowed herself to feel alive, to feel the warmth of the sun, the coolness of the breeze, and the stillness of the night. She wasn't running anymore. She was just being. And in that simple act of being, she was finding peace. As the days passed, Clara's sense of belonging grew stronger. She spent more time outside with Will, learning the land, fixing things around the cabin, and even teaching herself to cook better. She wasn't perfect at it, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that she was trying. She was learning, and that, in itself, felt like progress. Every time she looked at the small patch of earth she had helped grow, she felt a quiet pride in herself. She had a place now. She had roots, and they were beginning to take hold. But healing wasn't always a smooth path. There were days when Clara would wake up with a heaviness in her chest, remembering the past, feeling the weight of the things she had tried to outrun. There were nights when the fear would creep back in, making her wonder if she could ever truly let go. But those moments, though difficult, didn't last long. Will was there, steady as always, a constant reminder that she didn't have to face anything alone. He didn't try to fix her, didn't push her to talk when she wasn't ready. He just was. And that was enough. One day, Clara found herself walking through the woods near the cabin, her feet crunching on the fallen leaves. It was a cool afternoon, the sky overcast, and the trees whispered with the wind. She didn't know why she felt the need to go there, but something pulled her toward the quiet of the forest. She had been here before, but today it felt different. As she walked, her thoughts turned to the future, her future. What would it look like? What kind of person could she become now after everything? She thought about the life she had left behind, the fear, the running, the constant feeling that something was just waiting to catch up with her. She thought about Will and the promise he had made to protect her. She didn't know how long they would stay here, in this peaceful corner of the world, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to plan for the next escape. She didn't feel like she had to look over her shoulder. When Clara returned to the cabin, Will was sitting on the porch as usual, his gaze steady on the horizon. She didn't know what had changed inside her, but she felt it. The fear wasn't gone, not entirely, but it had lost its grip on her. She was no longer trapped in it. For the first time, she felt like she could face whatever came next. She walked up to him, sitting down beside him on the old wooden steps. Will didn't say anything at first, but after a moment he spoke softly. "Feeling better?" he asked, his voice warm with understanding. Clara nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think I am." There was nothing else to say. No grand declaration. No promises. Just the two of them sitting in the quiet, watching the world go by. And for Clara, that was enough. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. In this final part, Clara's emotional journey comes full circle. She begins to accept that healing is a process, and with Will's steady support, she learns to face her past without being defined by it. The quiet moments they share represent the peace she's finding, and the idea of moving forward without fear becomes a reality. This section emphasizes the idea that healing isn't linear, but it's about finding peace in the present and slowly letting go of the past.